I was intending to make 3 separate videos concerning the media I'm about to talk about, but I just thought, you know what, given recent discussions I've been having and further thoughts about it, I find that these 3 pieces of media have so much in common, I might as well discuss them in this one video. They are 3 adaptations of pieces of media that people have loved in the past, and yet only one of them has succeeded. Can you guess which one succeeded? Today I'm going to be talking about 3 shows which have a lot in common. All of them can be seen on a streaming service. 2 of them on Netflix, 1 of them on Disney+. All of them are direct adaptations of intellectual properties that people have been loving for decades now. All of them involve some sense of adventure to some extent. All of them involve some action and stuff like that. All of them involve talking about some kind of slavery at some point, or these 3 shows that are available on streaming services have a lot in common. All of them are about These 3 shows have a lot in common. All 3 can be viewed on streaming services. All 3 are about 8 episodes long. All of them regard someone trying to look for something, or try to achieve something, or try to beat some bad guys. There's some action, there's stuff like that. And all of them are adaptations of intellectual properties that people love so much. Now, of course, with one of them, it's not so much an adaptation in a traditional sense, but more of a continuation, but an adaptation nonetheless, seeing how it's adapting the foundational piece of work, followed by a spin-off media, or, well, a TV show based on that piece of media. But anyway, the pieces of media I'm going to discuss today are Ahsoka, Castlevania Nocturne, and the live-action adaptation of One Piece. All of these are adaptations that have come into the public realm in recent memory, but only one of them has succeeded, and that one is One Piece. Ahsoka and Castlevania Nocturne have faced heavy criticism from a lot of people online for reasons I'm about to discuss. The reason why One Piece succeeded where Ahsoka and Nocturne did not was because One Piece was far more competent in writing and gave a far better overall message that was leaving a better impact on the audience. Ahsoka and Nocturne, on the other hand, have been heavily critiqued for how poorly written they all are, with Ahsoka in particularly pandering more towards shills rather than telling a competent story, and Nocturne focusing more on virtue signaling than telling a cohesive plot with likable characters. One Piece, on the other hand, tells a story with likable characters as well as actual stakes for people to care about the characters. So, what can we learn from all this? What we can learn is that with One Piece, if you genuinely care about the source material, people are going to appreciate you for it. But with Nocturne, it's very clear that the creators of that show gave no legitimate respect, with the exception of the music and some other details. And with Ahsoka, Dave Filoni seems to have sacrificed his writing abilities all for the sake of pandering. Let's talk about these shows one at a time and eventually see why One Piece succeeded. Let's start out with Ahsoka. Ahsoka is a Disney Plus Star Wars live-action show, along many other live-action Disney Plus Star Wars shows like Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, and The Mandalorian. These live-action Disney Star Wars shows have not been having the best of reception. The first 2 seasons of Mandalorian received some positive reception. I even did a review of the first season a while back on this channel, recommending it to people. I have spoken. But later on down the line, people online started to notice that the quality in writing for Disney Star Wars live-action shows was plummeting to the point of complete and utter incompetency, focusing more on pandering to shills rather than telling stories. Now, something to note is that modern Disney is not quite the same darling that we loved from years past. Modern Disney has started to embrace a dangerous ideology, and so has Netflix for the most part. However, One Piece seems to be the exception, but I'll get into details about this particular worldview that Hollywood seems to keep pandering nowadays later. In the meantime, people kept critiquing these Disney Plus live action shows because they are run by a company who has this arrogant mindset of thinking because they are too big to fail, they are supposedly logically too big to care. They have this mindset of, well, if all we need to do is give people what they love, then what could possibly go wrong? Now, not everything from Star Wars that was brought out by Disney turned out to be completely rubbish. People have appreciated the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian. People can still have some positive views on the sequel trilogy. And people have been giving some positive attention to Andor and Rogue One. So it's not all been in vain. Not to mention the production value, given Disney's backup, has been very impressive. But unfortunately, because modern Disney has embraced an ideology of trying to pander to minorities first and foremost, and put competent storytelling to the sidelines, they have created stories which have gathered a lot of harsh criticism. For example, the recent Obi-Wan Kenobi show had gotten a lot of criticism for creating a story that, quite frankly, didn't even need to exist, as well as establishing a minority-oriented character who got stabbed by a lightsaber 3 times and survived, even though it's established in Star Wars that if you get stabbed by a lightsaber, it's certain death. And given the fact that they want to empower these minorities, they are clearly shy of killing off minorities like that because they want to empower the minorities and empower other women, all in the name of woke ideology. Now, as I've said in the past, if I haven't said it already, these virtues about empowering women and minorities doesn't sound like a bad thing in and of itself, but the thing about the modern woke ideology is that it takes this desired virtue of empowering minorities and women and takes it to an utmost extreme, to the point where they're ironically being racist and degrading towards white men. You see this kind of messaging all throughout modern entertainment, and a lot of people are beginning to notice these patterns and they're getting sick and tired of it. Basically, going back to the Disney Plus live-action Star Wars shows, Obi-Wan Kenobi had a climax of a fight between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and things pretty much ended off where the characters began, which rendered the entire show completely pointless. I would highly recommend watching a Jamie Costa fan film of Obi-Wan Kenobi instead. It's much more competent, it makes much more sense, and will give you the fan service that you're looking for. The Book of Boba Fett didn't fare much better either. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, even a lot of the people who'd be considered shills were not very fond of the Book of Boba Fett. It was very poorly received indeed. But then Ahsoka came along. Now, what was special about Ahsoka was that the writer, Dave Filoni, was coming on board to create the show. Now, a lot of people love Dave Filoni and his contributions to the Star Wars multimedia franchise, because Dave Filoni was the key creator behind Star Wars Clone Wars shows and had introduced the beloved characters, particularly Ahsoka Tano, an apprentice of Anakin Skywalker who had a compelling character arc of her own. And many people even today say that she is a more competent and more relatable female character than Rey Palpatine. So clearly Dave Filoni has the talent to create relatable characters, especially when he was leaning closely to George Lucas's study of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey structure. Dave Filoni would later on get involved with making Star Wars Rebels, which plays a crucial role in this Ahsoka Tano show. Now, a lot of people were more critical towards Rebels because a lot of the characters were perceived as fairly annoying compared to the ones introduced in Clone Wars, and the plot was a bit more incompetent. But people appreciated Star Wars Rebels for having the most epic moments in the franchise, such as Ahsoka Tano's emotional fight against Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi's final duel with Darth Maul. So, with Ahsoka, people looked at the show and seeing how Dave Filoni was getting involved, they thought, well, what could possibly go wrong? This is Dave Filoni. If anyone's going to save Star Wars, it's gotta be Dave Filoni, right? Unfortunately, Dave Filoni seems to be stroking his own ego rather than trying to tell a compelling story.
If I had to sum up Ahsoka in just one sentence, I'd say it's a show of missed opportunities. Just like its main villain, it was given every resource and advantage it could possibly ask for, and should have pulled off an easy win, but somehow managed to squander every single one with absolutely zero impact, and yet still smugly acted as if it had come out on top.
The thing is, people are seeking positive virtues that point to a timeless beauty, and One Piece, out of these three shows, is the closest that people get to these transcendental values that people seek. Eternal beauty values like redemption, friendship, adventure, and motivation. Whereas that sort of thing just isn't provided in Ahsoka and Nocturne.
The only time our characters have anything approaching a fight is when Black Annette complains behind Richter's back about him running away, but this is immediately resolved with zero consequences. So as a group they clearly don't work, but as individuals they are somehow even worse. The characters are annoying, shallow, unlikable, or a combination of the three.
One Piece also provides a far superior written world, far more relatable characters, and a much more consistent power system which has specific rules and allows the characters room to grow and to learn and, in turn, grow as characters. But the power systems in Ahsoka and Nocturne are completely all over the place, completely bending the rules from pre-established source material all over the place, which ultimately results in the following rule: the power system pretty much just comes from whatever's convenient for the writers, rather than the rules that have been established.
So you don't need me to tell you that Netflix have a pretty spotty record when it comes to live-action adaptations of popular Japanese IPs. I mean, who could forget the stunning non-success of Cowboy Bebop, a show that was so heavily geared towards modern audiences that it ended up turning away its existing fan base, failed to attract a new one, and got unceremoniously cancelled after just one season. Then came the news that One Piece, which started out as a manga comic before exploding into an entire media franchise in Japan, was next in line for a live-action adaptation. And even worse, it was going to be made by literally the same production company that handled Cowboy Bebop. Everyone was braced for another disaster in the making, just another doomed attempt to bend and warp a distinctly Japanese product into something that conforms to current-day Hollywood sensibilities, ultimately losing the very qualities that made it appealing in the first place. But here's the funny thing, One Piece is actually really good.
This causes many problems and so many questions. The world building is also very inconsistent with Ahsoka and Nocturne. With Ahsoka, there are far too many scenarios of why didn't characters do A, B, and C, and so on and so forth, for the plot to have any credibility.
Morgan then says that her people were the first to ride the space whales to other galaxies. If the space whales are now everywhere, and Morgan knows that you can use them to travel between galaxies, then why did she waste all of that time and effort building a hyperspace ring and looking for that MacGuffin when she could have just gotten a giant fishing net and captured one of the whales? Because if she did that, she would never have been caught by Ahsoka, and honestly, she is probably the most forgettable character out of the cast, which is funny since the show is literally named after her. Then we have Sabine, who despite betraying everything and everyone she knows, is never punished or even acknowledged as what she did was a bad thing. No, at the end of the episode, it's not even brought up. This goes to show that the morality in Disney Star Wars is completely backwards. Just think about it for a second. Sabine willingly betrayed the galaxy and is directly responsible for allowing Thrawn to return, so every death that now happens because of that choice is her fault. She could have easily prevented this entire situation from happening, but instead allowed him to return for purely selfish reasons. And yet this show will never acknowledge the consequences of her actions. Instead, what the show chooses to frame as someone doing something wrong or acting immoral is this Asian man. And what exactly does he do that is so terrible? Well, his job, which is to question Hera for disobeying direct orders, which she did in fact do, and yet he is treated with nothing but scorn and vitriol by everyone. Even Mon Mothma has a smug grin on her face when Hera tries to belittle him. This made me wonder, why is this man who is objectively doing the right thing being treated worse than Sabine, who is objectively doing the wrong thing? Well, that's because the writers are f***ed up people and they have a f***ed up worldview. The way they view good and evil is that anything, no matter how harmful or destructive that our heroes do, is good, and anything anyone else does which goes against our heroes, however minor, however well-intentioned, is seen as evil. This is how the writers at Disney perceive the world and why their stories are so immoral. It's a very simple-minded, you are either with me or you're against me mentality, which, ironically, is how Anakin behaved when he fell to the dark side.
If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
Episode 8 of Ahsoka is a terrible finale to a terrible show, filled with nothing but stupid contrivances, awful choreography, bad dialogue, dull characters, inconsistent pacing, and worst of all, this show was utterly pointless. That's right, after 8 entire episodes, nothing has been accomplished.
With Nocturne, they are completely ignorant of history and religion that they are trying to comment on, and thus they are completely incompetent at telling a coherent story because their criticisms and their commentary are illegitimate.
Let's start off with Richter Belmont, the protagonist and pathetic loser. Now, when I compare him to Trevor, the OG, he is weaker, more annoying, over-emotional, less funny, less competent, and doesn't have any sort of meaningful character growth. And despite the fact that he is supposed to be the main character, instead he ends up playing second fiddle to race-swapped Black Annette, who is the true protagonist of the show. Black Annette is an annoying, lecturing, smug asshole who dismisses other people's problems because at least they weren't a slave like she was.
Oppression Olympics. Let's go.
Naturally, the plot isn't any better. It has a lot of contrivances, tons of lecturing, and bad pacing. Other than some really good fight scenes, which the show is completely reliant on, it has nothing else to offer. She is also very angry at Richter, and when his very forgiving family say that Olrox was the vampire that killed his mother, Black Annette says so what? His problems don't matter, because at least he wasn't a slave.
Shut your f***ing mouth, young lady.
Wow, I didn't know Black Annette was a slave. It's not like this show has said this in every f***ing episode. This scene is contrasted with Black Annette, who goes into the Black Panther spirit world in order to talk to her ancestors. Unlike Richter, her mentor comes across as more hopeful and positive, but even though the writers are desperately trying to show her being good, she ends up saying that their problems are not as big as ours because they were never slaves. Do these people ever talk about anything else other than slavery? If you simply remove all of the action scenes, then what you have left is a poorly written story with terrible characters crying all the time. Don't even bother watching it, it's not worth the time it takes, and I guarantee the second season, if this show even gets one, will be even worse than this.
They have no groundings in what they are trying to say, and they focus much more on pandering rather than telling compelling stories. But with One Piece, on the other hand, it has consistent stories which has rules that it maintains to through and through, and certain plot points come back and characters grow and learn from each other.
I mean, I'll be real here, it's completely bonkers and over-the-top ridiculous at times. The characters look like they just stumbled in from a cosplay convention, and everything from the technology levels to the laws of physics themselves are treated like optional extras, but there's a beating heart of vibrant, colourful, adventurous exuberance at the core of One Piece that's just impossible not to enjoy. I actually found myself eagerly awaiting each new episode because I was genuinely invested in the large cast of likeable characters and excited to see where the crazy freewheeling plot took me next. This is what TV used to be like. Anyway, the point here is that One Piece is basically a case study in how to adapt an anime to live action without losing the charm of the original.
And the show doesn't make the same mistake of pandering like Ahsoka and Nocturne does. One Piece keeps both male and female characters accountable, whereas Ahsoka and Nocturne ironically teaches very terrible lessons. It teaches us that men don't have to go through that men can go through trials and tribulations and can earn their epic moment without even having to try. Ahsoka and Nocturne also teaches people that women can get away with selfish actions, even though that's completely terrible. But One Piece says that men and women are going to be accountable for everything that they do. No one is exempted from that kind of accountability. And what's more, One Piece provides a far superior positive message compared to Ahsoka and Nocturne. And One Piece promises so much more. Nocturne and Ahsoka give more into this pessimistic, weird form of socialism called the woke movement that has been culminating in recent years and that more and more people are getting sick and tired of. And this strangely nihilistic yet pandering worldview translates into the stories into the worst ways possible. With Ahsoka, it ultimately concludes that you can endanger the entire galaxy as long as you save the one person that you care about. That is endorsing selfishness. In Nocturne, it encourages you to be a jerk. It has characters who have had troubled pasts, but they let their pasts be excuses to be jerks to others. Also, they are spoiled brats because the show does a poor job at representing the French Revolution. With One Piece, on the other hand, both the military and the pirates, and even the fish people, are shown to have their struggles, their relatability, and even their flaws in how they approach life. So, it is a positive message to keep us aware that even slaves are to be, and even former slaves, are to be accountable for moral duty. So it's no wonder that One Piece is getting such beloved feedback. So, to summarize, the reason why so many people are appreciating One Piece as opposed to Ahsoka and Nocturne is because One Piece actually entertains their audience first and foremost, as well as brings these brilliantly positive messages that can positively affect the people watching at home. The same cannot be said for Ahsoka and Nocturne. As much as the people behind Ahsoka and Nocturne would like to virtue signal and pander with their pessimistic form of socialism, they ultimately, and perhaps unintentionally, create characters who are terrible role models. Instead of showcasing actual virtue, they virtue signal. For example, in Ahsoka, the show endorses selfishness by having these characters be put on a pedestal and never be accountable for their selfish acts. There's a green lady who is court-martialed for getting 2 soldiers killed, acting against the interests of the New Republic, as well as putting her son in danger by taking him outside of a safety zone. It's never explicitly said about bringing her son to her dangerous work, as far as I can recall. I probably need to watch the show again to double check. But the point is, she has deliberately put lives in danger and she got 2 people killed. And yet, despite that, Princess Leia lets her off the hook. The ironic thing is, if this behavior was done by a male character, they'd probably be a lot more harsh. This showcases these modern writers' double standards. Also, Sabine is also a selfish character who deliberately chooses to put the entire galaxy in danger just to save the one she loves. Now, this sort of story could have worked well as a tragedy, but the thing is, Sabine is never held accountable for her selfishness, nor do the storytellers have the insight enough to call Sabine out on her selfishness. And even when it is brought up, it's quickly put aside. And Sabine's selfishness to endanger the galaxy is portrayed more as a positive than a negative thing, which is very poor writing if you ask me. And Nocturne isn't any better. Compared to the Belmont of the previous Castlevania show, Richter is a crybaby who has character growth that isn't really earned. Any form of character growth kind of comes out of nowhere. What's presented in the show could possibly work as a first draft, but not as a final product. That seems to be a reoccurring pattern with these stories. They seem to work well as first drafts, but not as final products. And that's a problem. And even though the Nocturne show tries to showcase that they care, that they're trying to raise up issues about slavery, they write a specific character to almost non-stop talk about slavery, even when she's resisting against it. I mean, come on. Do you ever talk about anything other than the fact that you used to be a slave? Like, just, look, I'm sorry that you had to go through all that, but being a slave doesn't mean that you have the excuse to be a jerk to other people. That's not how it works. And you have various other characters who work along the lines of this. And these double standards are once again very apparent in these writers. But One Piece, on the other hand, doesn't do the whole double standard shtick. Instead, all the characters are kept accountable for their selfishness. The female character is held accountable for her own wrongdoings, and the show portrays her fondness of stealing, as well as her other sins, as a bad thing. But it provides a positive message in the fact that there is redemption for her. The characters are also very likable, and One Piece does an excellent job at establishing its own power system, as well as specific character strengths and flaws in such a specific way that the character actually that the audience actively wants the characters to succeed. There's a reason why so many people often find Batman more relatable than Superman. It's because Batman has more to overcome. Thus, the vast majority of people who have more to overcome latch onto Batman rather than Superman. Of course, there are exceptions in stories where a perfect character can help others change surrounding him. And there's nothing wrong with that if the story's handled quite well. It's just that if you're trying to write a compelling character, you've got to give them specific strengths, and if they have weaknesses, they've got to learn to overcome them. You never endorse the weaknesses. You never endorse your character being a jerk back to other characters, because that's not how morality works. Instead, you've got to be accountable for yourself and for the others around you. And this kind of positive storytelling is showcased in One Piece, where the characters have goals, the characters have things to overcome, and there is a lot more promise yet to come. And I think that's the ultimate reason why so many people latched onto One Piece as a good adaptation. So, what do you all think about all this?
Dear Mr. Oda, thank you for creating One Piece and making so many people around the world happy. Playing Luffy is a dream come true, and I will always do my best to bring him to live action. Luffy is a friend for the world who teaches us about courage, dreams, and family. I am beyond honored to be a part of this story, and me and the entire live action team admire you so much. Thank you for One Piece, and thank you for Luffy. I feel like this role was meant to be, and I want to play Luffy for a very long time.
本当にそうしてほしい。もう君以外想像できない今のところ。
And he tells such a story that heavily depends on the viewers, particularly the casual viewers like myself at the time, to have already seen... Oh, for Pete's sakes, are you serious? For Pete's sakes.